X-Men 97 is truly working some wonders out there, and when I say that, I mean it, because this cartoon just seemingly killed off one of the most powerful characters in the X-Men franchise, and no, I'm not talking about magic. This time. Instead, we're talking about a mutant who's capable of leveling entire nations, putting a presidential candidate on trial, and someone who got shot for it when he lost his argument. And this mutant is none other than Exodus. If you don't recognize that name, no problem, because he's extremely underrated, but did you know that he can erase entire solar systems? Yeah, so the fact that many X-Men fans couldn't even pick him out of a lineup needs to be fixed ASAP. Join us as we go down the rabbit hole and explain the infernal anatomy of Exodus.
Your death shall salvage the day.
Who was Bennet du Paris before he became a weapon? The story of Exodus begins with Bennet du Paris, who, as you might have guessed from the very on-the-nose name, was a French nobleman back in the 12th century. He took up the cross as a crusader in the Holy Land, basically a soldier of faith. He was friends with Eobard Garrington, who was the original Black Knight of that era, but then things took a turn in Egypt. The two men were out chasing this legend of a lost pharaoh, the Tower of Power, which would be found in this special place hidden from everyone, known as Aqaba. It's always something like that, isn't it? And in the midst of the dangerous expedition, they had a falling out. Bennet pressed on alone, and that's when he first met and Saba Nur. Yup, he met Apocalypse in the middle of the desert, and Apocalypse took one look at the guy and recognized his latent mutant potential. So Apocalypse did what he does best. He woke it up. Suddenly, this ordinary medieval warrior was turned into a mutant, changing his body and mind in an instant. And it's all done by one of the oldest and most dangerous beings in the Marvel Universe, which brings us to our second most important question. What did Apocalypse actually do to his body? I'd love to tell you that Apocalypse just flipped a switch and that X gene just turned on, but when is life ever that simple? Instead, Apocalypse actively enhanced and amplified Duparis's powers to the extreme. I mean, being a mutant will always come with some superhuman development, right? Apocalypse just turned that dial up to 11. Then, he gave Duparis the name Exodus. Call me crazy, but I think Apocalypse specifically did that just to use the religious flame that burned in Duparis against him. With this new name, Apocalypse had basically crowned Duparis as his servant. This change may have happened overnight, but it had consequences. Just about every other mutant we know had their powers develop when they were about 11 or 12, basically when they're going through puberty. This means that as their bodies grow, their mutant powers grow too, basically striking a balance between the two. The body grew in a way to support the powers, and the powers figured out a way to exist without damaging the body. This is why the limitations that we've pointed out before in our other anatomy videos, which you should totally watch if you haven't, can be explained thoroughly. But for Exodus, all of that happened in a second. His nervous system and his psionic capacity were forced past their natural limits by Apocalypse, and that's why it's so damn hard to get a proper read on his power levels, because his body and power don't have that inherent balance between them. Apocalypse just made something in the moment, and he immediately tested it out by making Exodus fight against Circe, the Eternal, and the spirit of Dane Whitman in the Black Knight's body. So even before Exodus could fully understand what was happening to him and what changes his body had just gone through, he was thrust into battle with a guy who was basically wearing his dead friend's body. It's a pretty brutal origin story. Why did Exodus betray Apocalypse and get buried for centuries? I would have been surprised if cracks didn't begin to show up between Exodus and Apocalypse, and it's an extra treat to watch Circe and the Black Knight do it. They are two seasoned strategists after all, so of course, when they realized that Exodus is literally a brand new weapon, instead of getting into combat with him and maybe getting themselves blown up, the two Avengers instead convinced Exodus that he was disposable. They kept insisting that he was just a tool, nothing more, and I think seeing his friend tell him that truly moved something in Exodus. Especially since when Apocalypse ordered him to kill the Black Knight, Exodus refused. He turned on his creator and called Apocalypse a false god. Obviously, Apocalypse couldn't care any less, so he beat him down without much effort and sealed Exodus away in a hidden crypt deep in the Swiss Alps, where he remained for roughly 8 centuries. During this time, Exodus's body didn't age, and it didn't decay either. Now, you could argue that, yeah, mutant bodies are more durable, so of course he wouldn't, but this was hundreds of years of enforced stasis. I think even the most experienced mutants we can name would have some kind of a reaction to it, but Exodus's body didn't. I think it's because his physiology basically operates on a similar timescale to Apocalypse's own immortality. Whatever Apocalypse did to him changed his body's natural functions. We'll get into this later, but remember, for 800 years, Exodus was comatose, and then he came out of it, looking exactly like the day he went into that coma. Whatever else you think about him, Bennet du Paris is truly a marvelous man. How does an Omega-level brain actually work? Let's get to the main topic of our video today. What did all of that enhancement actually get him? Well, the full list is absolutely staggering. He has powers of telepathy, telekinesis, and teleportation, to name just a few. He can also create powerful force fields and even throw energy blasts. Because of his telekinesis, he can levitate himself as well as other objects around him, and that allows him to fly around. The scariest ability in his arsenal, though, is his ability to psychically drain energy from victims to boost himself up. He can also create psychic whirlwinds, and if push comes to shove, he can resurrect people from the dead. Obviously, this isn't a typical set of mutant powers because he has so many different tricks up his sleeve, and that's why the power we usually focus on the most is telekinesis. He's an Omega-level telekinetic, and in terms of powers, that basically makes him mutant royalty. An Omega-level mutant is someone whose powers have no upper limit that you can measure, and it's true for Exodus as well. His power set is very much undefined because he can literally do things that have left even the strongest members of the X-Men shook. I mean, there's been moments where his mental abilities have gone toe-to-toe with Professor X, Emma Frost, and even Rachel Gray. One time, he put a dozen X-Men to sleep instantly, which is a very small feat for a man of his capabilities. He can also teleport himself and others across the planet, which was used for years to shuttle acolytes between Earth and Avalon, their orbiting space station. As confirmed by Screen Rant, Exodus's psionic ability can literally reach planetary and solar system endangering scales. We'll dig into that properly a little later on because it deserves its own full section, but yeah, this is a guy who can threaten the whole universe as we know it. With that in mind, we couldn't help but wonder what sort of nervous system he was working with, because his body and brain need to be capable of regulating power at incredible scales. He's literally a cosmic threat, but despite that, Marvel has treated Exodus as a mid-tier X-Men villain, which is kind of insane. How does Exodus's faith function as part of his anatomy? Power is a big thing in the Marvel Universe, but as Uncle Ben once said, with great power comes great responsibility. To be fair though, those responsibilities are completely dependent on the way the person thinks. That's why we've got some great villains and heroes who, when stripped of their powers, act as two sides of the same coin. This is where Exodus's faith comes into play. He's written as a religious zealot who genuinely believes that he's protecting his people even when he's actively putting people he cares about in danger. But that's where the tragedy of Exodus really lies. This explains every single bad decision he's ever made. His psionic abilities allow him to operate on a near omniscient level. He can read minds, detect threats, see intentions that other characters cannot. So, in an ideal scenario, Exodus is the most well-informed man in the room at any given time. But because he has this moral superiority and certainty that he knows everything already, it bites him right on the ass most of the time. Much like those crappy romance book characters, Exodus hears half of the conversation, decides he already knows the answer, and acts out instead of staying back and gathering more information. He reaches the conclusion that he has the answer using his faith and ideology. His god-tier senses are working overtime to get everything sorted, but he filters almost all of it out because faith has already told him everything he needs to know. The best example I can give you guys is this instant that happened during the Genosha Civil War. Fabian Cortez betrayed the people, and the island descended into chaos. Exodus rolls up to the chaos and confronts Cortez, seemingly killing him, and then he turns his attention to the mutant population of the island and surrounded the entire nation in a force field, inciting the mutants to wipe out the remaining humans. He did all that because, in his mind, it was time to seek vengeance for the years of mistreatment that mutants had faced at the hands of humans. When I say this is insanity, I mean it. How did a god-tier psychic keep losing to weaker opponents? With everything I've told you guys about Exodus, I'm sure this question has been running through your heads, because if he's this strong and this powerful, it makes no sense that he keeps getting defeated by mutants who are, at least in theory, weaker than him. Well, during the Genosian Civil War, Professor X found a crack in Exodus's armor, metaphorically speaking. Basically, what he did was make Black Knight completely imperceptible to Exodus temporarily. As a result, Whitman could sneak up on Exodus and strike him down, and the ancient mutant truly didn't see that coming. Pun intended. Once this method proved effective, every now and again, whenever our heroes would face off against Exodus, they'd be able to survive it by using Black Knight against him in a similar pattern. But there was an exception. There was one time where Exodus attacked Nate Gray, you know, X-Man, the son of Scott and Jean from a different universe. He's an alternate reality version of Cable and an absolute psychic powerhouse, and Exodus wanted to drain Nate's energy and use it to strengthen himself. But as he was doing that, he found out that Nate's powers were too much for him to absorb. Basically, Exodus got overloaded, and in that weakened state, Nate finished the fight and threw him into a cracked ravine. He sealed Exodus beneath the earth with his own powers. This was a total anatomical miscalculation about what he could safely take in and what he couldn't, but the theme is constant throughout all the examples I've given you. Exodus almost always underestimates the situation and pays for it. Given that he's an Omega-level telekinetic, it also makes a lot of sense that his vulnerability is more along the lines of psychological, because hurting an Omega-level mutant is a whole ordeal in and of itself, and it's basically next to impossible. You know how they say it's always darkest under the lamp? Well, that's true for Exodus because he notices everything, and yet he doesn't do enough. What was Exodus's role in Magneto's Acolytes? Exodus remained entombed until Magneto found him and revived him in the modern era. Surprisingly enough, Exodus woke up and decided to give himself to Magneto's mutant supremacist cause with full gusto because why not? When Magneto seized control of the space station Greymalkin and named it Avalon, Exodus was the one who was sent out to gather followers. Every mutant he recruited became a core member of the Acolytes, the group of mutants who worshipped Magneto's vision. Most of these people had already been misled by Fabian Cortez into believing that Magneto had died a martyr, so recruiting them wasn't that difficult, but everything came crashing down when Cortez's lie was finally revealed. Soon enough, it became very obvious that Magneto was still alive and Cortez had deceived them. The Acolytes left Cortez completely, and Exodus became the leader of the group, and his loyalty was truly a thing to wonder, because after Magneto was left mindless following an attack by the X-Men, Exodus would remain by his side and have one-sided conversations with him. He was convinced he could hear Magneto's voice guiding him. Now, if this were anyone else, they would have claimed the Acolytes for themselves and would have gone amok, but even when he could have seized power for himself, Exodus remained someone else's servant and carried on the tasks that his master, quote-unquote, told him to, despite his comatose state. Why did a villain end up on Krakoa's ruling council? When Charles Xavier, Magneto, and Moira McTaggart founded the mutant nation of Krakoa, they extended invitations to all mutants, hero and villain alike, as a deliberate attempt to heal old wounds by starting all over as mutants united. Exodus received an invitation, and he walked through that gateway with them. He actually ended up helping to lead Krakoa by sitting on the Quiet Council on what's known as the Winter Section with Mr. Sinister and Mystique. This section was explicitly built to represent the interests of the more criminal and morally compromised elements of mutant society. Despite being a part of the government body, Exodus still held on to his fanatical sense of purity, so obviously he clashed with Mr. Sinister almost immediately. He had open disdain for the geneticist and even threatened to end him if their paths crossed again, and this might be one of the most insane tidbits in the X-Men's modern lore. As a part of the council, Exodus actually did do some stuff. Like when Magneto launched a plan to terraform Mars, Exodus was one of the Omega-level mutants who was brought in specifically to help power the process. That kind of task required an output on a planetary scale at least, and the council gave him the job because they knew he'd be able to pull through. Also, there was the time when Mystique plotted to resurrect her deceased wife Destiny behind everyone's back. This is because mutants who could see the future were actually forbidden on Krakoa for fear of their ability to unravel McTaggart's plans. Of course, trying to stop Mystique from doing anything involving Destiny is probably not going to work out, and it was because of Exodus and his support that Destiny actually ended up with a seat on the Quiet Council. Nowadays, he's dedicated to spreading the cause of the mutant messiah, Hope Summers, whom he treats as a literal biblical savior. Bennet du Paris isn't all bad, but even when he's doing good, he's got the vibe of someone carrying out a cause bigger than himself. How did Exodus end up leading acolytes in the Savage Land? This brings us to the story that probably brought you guys here in the first place. In X-Men 97, Season 2, after the destruction of Genosha, Exodus showed up leading a fraction of Magneto's acolytes. These acolytes were ready to do whatever was necessary to carry out Magneto's vision, and they were working from a hidden base deep in the Savage Land. Now, what really triggered the catastrophe was the mutant-hating presidential candidate, Graydon Creed. He launched his presidential campaign, which was very, very anti-mutant, and the acolytes, along with Exodus and Colossus, infiltrated his rally and took him hostage. They demanded the release of the mutants who were being detained by the X-Factor program, arbitrarily, might I add, in exchange for getting Creed back alive. As a result, there was a moral standoff. Nightcrawler, who is literally Graydon Creed's half-brother, insists that Creed deserves an actual trial instead of a summary execution, despite everything he's done. Exodus agrees to this and nominates Colossus as the judge. The terms are set. If Nightcrawler is able to convince Colossus, who's still heartbroken and full of rage about his sister's death on Genosha, then Creed goes free. If Exodus wins, though, Nightcrawler has to join the Acolytes. The trial begins, and Exodus's case is brief. Creed hates mutants simply for existing, and in Exodus's eyes, that's enough reason to kill him. He doesn't care about Creed's psychology or motivation. He doesn't want to look for any hope of redemption or kindness because he has already picked the verdict before the trial began. In my opinion, this episode really earns its stripes because of the way these two very religious characters are portrayed. Nightcrawler takes the long road to forgiveness, basically walking Creed through the idea that his hatred of mutants stems from his resentment for how his parents treated him and the fact that he never had powers himself despite having mutant parents. Nightcrawler doubled down, saying that if Creed could forgive himself for not developing powers, then he would finally be able to see humans and mutants as equals instead of enemies. This is a persuasive argument that even Colossus agrees with. Colossus has always been a big softy at heart, so Exodus feels the tide turning against his verdict, but before Colossus can deliver final judgment, Polaris and Bishop destroy the Acolyte's mutant power-inhibiting tower and crash the party, causing a fight to break out. The highlight of the episode is a sword fight between Nightcrawler and Exodus, but in the midst of that chaos, Creed grabs a gun and shoots Exodus. It's an awesome fight scene for sure, but it also gives us a great look at Exodus's ideology. He's someone who genuinely cares only about his opinions, because once he's made his mind up, he doesn't really want to budge and change it. What is Exodus's single greatest feat of power in the comics? Let's go back to 2023. During the Sins of Sinister arc, where Mr. Sinister basically took over the entire universe, we got Immoral X-Men issue 3, which gave us a taste of just how insane Exodus's powers can be. This story arc leaps into a far future timeline where Exodus's faith has fractured into competing sects. Each one is built from a different Sinister-infected cloned iteration of Bennet du Paris himself, basically spreading a galaxy-spanning religion across the stars. And eventually, two of these rival Exodus clones come into direct conflict. Neither of them want to back down because, remember, Exodus never thinks he's wrong, so they keep on fighting, and the collision between the psionic energies of these two clones is powerful enough to instantly obliterate an entire solar system. 1 minute it's there, and the next it's gone. Exodus's psionic powers are no joke. They can reach truly fearful heights if unleashed without any restraint. Also, the precision of his telekinetic abilities is so immense that he once reconstructed Charles Xavier's brain and skull after the professor was shot in the head. Xavier's subconscious defenses fought him the entire way too. Restoring the mind and memories that went with the death took some work, because even Magneto had to pitch in, but you gotta agree that's an absolutely astounding display of power. The same psionic anatomy that could erase entire solar systems in an instant can also carefully rebuild a single human mind with perfect precision. That's what we call range. Anyways, after discussing Exodus for almost 20 minutes now, there's something I want to know. Do you guys think it's fair that he's not talked about as much by X-Men fans? I feel like this is a character that could truly be worth discussing. He's been around for so long and done so much, And then, in his biggest modern spotlight yet, he basically died holding a trial that he didn't even need to hold and was killed by a human he refused to see as a threat. It's tragic, but I have to admit, it's a very fitting end for a character like him. I just kind of wish we had seen more of him before it went down. That said, what do you guys think? Do you want to see more of Bennet du Paris, or do you think that there are enough fanatical religious mutants out there? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe because that's the best way to see more videos like it. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time.